Guten Tag everyone! In this video I'll show you how to remove the steering wheel from your Audi and upgrade it to the more sporty looking wheel from an Audi R8 or TT RS. Today I'm working on a 2016 A6, but you can perform this steering wheel upgrade for many recent generation Audi models. For details, I will have links in the description to a few vendors that offer upgrades for you, but for now, let's get into the install. This wheel is from an Audi TT RS, but shares the same design with the later model Audi R8. I purchased the wheel and airbag separately online. Both are second hand, but in great condition. It took a while to find them, but with some patience, I eventually found them for a reasonable price. Depending on where you are in the world, you may find it easier to source than I did here in Australia. To enable the car to support and recognize the buttons on the later style wheel, I am using an electronic adapter module and wiring harness from a company called Ambrace. Link is in the description for that. Time to install. And firstly, we need to access the boot or trunk to disconnect the battery. After lifting the boot floor, removing the spare wheel and toolkit, we have access to the negative battery terminal. Here we have a 10mm nut that we need to loosen. The terminal can then be removed and set aside. When we head back into the car, we need to remove the airbag. To do so, the steering wheel is rotated 90 degrees. On the back of the steering wheel are two metal bars or springs that retain the pegs from the airbag to hold it in place. We use a screwdriver or similar tool to lever the springs away from the pegs to free the airbag. You may wish to rest a cloth on the steering column shroud behind the steering wheel to prevent damage while you do this. You can see I opted to use the camera on my phone to help it easier to see what's going on back there. Once you have one of the pegs free, rotate the wheel 180 degrees and then release the airbag from the other side as well. You should then re-center the steering wheel so it is perfectly straight and square. The airbag is simply lifted away, but we must disconnect the yellow airbag connector, and there is also a small black connector at the bottom of the steering wheel as well. Now the airbag is free to be removed from the car. This is what the inside of the steering wheel looks like. We have a bolt at the center that retains the steering wheel on the steering column. This requires a somewhat uncommon triple square type socket, so it's a good idea to ensure you have these sockets before you start this job. With the bolt mostly loose but not fully removed, give the wheel firm taps from the back to free it from the column. Then remove the bolt the rest of the way and set it aside somewhere safe. You will note it has blue Loctite type compound on the thread. We can now lift the steering wheel away from the car and store it away if we ever want to reverse this change and reinstall the old wheel in the future. We then need to split the steering column shroud. I'm using some plastic trim tools here, which are highly recommended to avoid damage. There are clips either side that need to be released. We need to expose these panels to aid with installing the wiring harness. With the hood section raised, it reveals two Torx bolts that need to be removed, along with one at the bottom above the driver's knee. Loosen and remove these three bolts and set them aside safely. It's then time to expose the lower part of the dashboard. To do so, we first remove the side panel. This is simply pulled away. Again, the trim tools help make this an easier and safer job. With the panel removed, it exposes a bolt that requires removal, along with a pair of bolts at the lower area of the footwell. From memory, these were an 8mm bolt head. We remove all three and set them aside. The lower dash panel can then be gently pulled away and lowered. It does not need to be fully removed from the car. Now onto the center console. We need to access the start button to run a jumper wire from the Ambrace wiring harness. Here we first lift the shifter boot. This exposes some access to gently but firmly pull up on the center console panel. This is a somewhat stressful process as you have to pull very hard, but with persuasion it will come up. I pulled the forward side first and then the rearward side. This reveals a pair of bolts that hold the ashtray in place. We can now remove these to loosen the ashtray and pull it forward slightly. This is done so to allow us to run the cables beneath the ashtray. The HVAC controls are then pulled away. This is simply clipped in place, and the trim tools make great work of lifting this panel out from the dashboard. We can push the start button out from the center console panel, disconnect the plug, and set the start button aside. And lastly, we need to unplug the 3 connectors from behind the HVAC unit and set it aside. It's now time to install the wiring harness from Ambrace that enables the steering wheel buttons to function. Along with the inline adapter harness, we will also install the larger red CAN module and the small green LIN module, which are respectively installed under the dash and inside the steering wheel. The main harness connector goes into the back of the steering column, where we must unplug the OEM connector and add in the Ambrace harness in line. The longer of the 2 wire pigtails from the harness are routed under the dashboard, beneath the ashtray, and up through the start button hole. Next, we need to de-pin the start button plug. This may be done using the supplied tool from Ambrace. Firstly, remove the outer sleeve from the connector, then from the connector remove pins 3 and 6. Insert these into the 2-pin male connector that has been supplied into pins 1 and 2. That is, pin 3 goes to pin 1, pin 6 goes to pin 2. In my case, these were the black and blue wires respectively. Secure the male connector with its locking clip. Then feed the 2 free wires from the female connector into the car's original 6-pin plug. Pin 1 goes to position 3, pin 2 goes to position 1. Join the 2 Ambrace 2-pin connectors together, jump it between one another, and this will enable the start button to function on the steering wheel. We can reinstall the outer sleeve on the original start button connector, then reconnect it to the start button, and feed the button back into the center console panel. We can re-secure the ashtray in place with the original bolts, and then lastly, press the center console back down and reattach the shifter boot to the console. We may then move on to the ESP button. Route the shorter of the 2 pigtails from the Ambrace harness to this location. We need to remove the 6-pin connector from behind the ESP button. Then, with the outer sleeve removed, using a pick, release the wire at pin 1 and insert it into a supplied 2-pin male plug into pin 1. We then slide the associated loose wire from the Ambrace harness back into the factory 6-pin plug at pin position 1. Likewise, remove the wire at pin 4 of the 6-pin plug and insert it into the pin 2 of the 2-pin male plug. And then slide the loose wire from the Ambrace harness back into pin 4 of the factory 6-pin plug. The pair of 2-pin plugs may then be jumpered together, the original 6-pin plug can be reassembled with its outer sleeve, and then it may be reinserted back into the ESP button. The HVAC module can now be reconnected with its 3 plugs and reinstalled into the dash panel by firmly pressing it into place. The steering column shroud may now be reattached with its original 3 screws, and the top lid for the column clipped back in place. Ensure you get this lined up straight and correct so that it clips down appropriately. Then, with the red CAN module connected to the blue connector for the Ambrace harness, you'll need to ensure the lever is latched closed to secure the connector. We can then tie this wiring and module up under the dash with a zip tie to keep it secure and tidy. This just needs to be somewhere appropriate to be held in place to not allow it to move around too loosely. Then we can lift the lower dash panel back up in place, give it a firm press across the top to clasp it back to the main dashboard, and affix it with its original 3 bolts. Finally, we reattach the side panel to finish the dash assembly. And now on to installing the new wheel. We have a number of electrical connectors that need to be installed to make this all work. Firstly, there is a small 4-pin connector at the bottom of the inside of the steering wheel, and another small 6-pin connector at the top. In the middle towards the top is where the large yellow airbag connector goes to attach to the steering column. To make all this work, we have a small LIN module from Ambrace that needs to be secured inside the airbag area. This has a set of connectors to bridge between the steering wheel and the airbag and the LIN module itself. The LIN module has a set of connectors that may bridge between the steering wheel and the airbag harness. but we first need to install the wheel on the car. This simply slides into place, ensuring that it is located with the steering wheel straight and the small key mark on the column lines up with the mark on the wheel itself, so you know they're both pointing in the right direction. The securing bolt can then be screwed in place and then tightened, torqued to 30 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. And lastly, with the wiring pre-attached to the airbag, the connectors can all be hooked up, gently lifting the connectors up into place, and the LIN module being set inside the steering wheel. Then the airbag can be pushed into place so that the locking clips securely hold it to the wheel. And that is the TTRS or Audi R8 steering wheel install all completed. A much more sporty feel, some additional buttons on the wheel, and that special red engine start button. Really makes the interior feel like a special place. Thanks for watching.